I had always dreamt of camping alone in the forest, away from the noise of my city life. One Friday afternoon, brimming with excitement, I packed my tent, sleeping bag, and some provisions before heading to the dark forest. I parked my car at the edge of the woods, shouldered my backpack, and began to hike into the dense trees. The sun was still shining as I found a small clearing and set up camp. The tranquility was perfect. Tall trees, a gentle breeze, chirping birds, and a crackling campfire as dusk approached. But as night fell, the forest grew eerily quiet. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. Wrapped in my sleeping bag, staring up at the starlit sky, I felt a mix of solitude and exhilaration. Suddenly, a rustling in the bushes made my heart race. I told myself it was probably just an animal, but the noise persisted, growing louder and closer. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, but saw nothing. Trying to reassure myself, I stoked the fire and hoped it would keep any curious creatures at bay. The sense of being watched grew stronger, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then, just as I was about to return to my tent, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the leaves. My blood ran cold. Someone was out there. I grabbed a large stick for protection and called out, but there was no response. The figure emerged from the shadows, standing just beyond the reach of my firelight. I couldn't make out his features, but I felt his eyes boring into me. Panic surged through me. I slowly backed towards my tent, but the figure began moving towards me, his steps quick and purposeful. I ran, my heart pounding as I plunged into the darkness. The branches clawed at my arms and face as I stumbled through the underbrush. Then I saw a faint glow of moonlight ahead and burst into a clearing with a small cabin. I pounded on the door, crying for help. An old man answered, alarmed by my appearance. I begged him to let me in, and he quickly locked the door behind me. I collapsed, shaken and exhausted. He handed me a blanket and said we'd sort things out in the morning. The next morning, we returned to my campsite, but the stranger was gone. My fear of that night lingered as I packed up and left the forest behind, vowing never camp alone again. The solitude I once sought had turned into a nightmare I would never forget. The second story. It was a stormy night, and the old Moonlight Inn was battered by wind and rain. As the night receptionist, I was alone at the desk, the only sounds being the ticking clock and the storm outside. Suddenly the front door creaked open, and a man stood there, soaked and shrouded in a dark coat and wide-brimmed hat. His face was hidden, but his piercing eyes met mine. I said, "Hey, good evening." I tried to sound calm, saying, "How can I help you?" He stepped forward, dripping water onto the floor, and handed me a wallet. "I need a room," he rasped. Something about him was unsettling. His clothes were old-fashioned, and though his face was familiar, I couldn't place him. I asked for ID, and he reluctantly gave me a driver's license. His name was Jack Harrison. As he took the key to room 13, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I quickly checked online and found an article about a man named Jack Harrison, wanted for violent crimes. He had disappeared years ago, and the police had been searching for him ever since. I called 911, and the police arrived soon. They went to room 13, but when they unlocked the door, the room was empty. The bed was untouched, and the window was open, letting the rain in. The officers searched thoroughly but found no trace of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. They advised me to keep the doors locked and call if I saw him again. The rest of the night was a blur. I watched the security footage, but there was no sign of him leaving. As dawn broke, the storm eased, and the other staff arrived. They were as baffled as I was. To this day, I still don't know what happened to Jack Harrison, but I can't forget that stormy night at the Moonlight Inn and the mysterious man who vanished without a trace. The third story. On a chilly autumn evening, my friends and I decided to explore the old abandoned factory on the edge of the town. The factory was a decaying relic with broken windows and rusted doors. As we squeezed through a gap in the fence and ventured inside, the wind howled through the empty halls, sending shivers down my spine. "Tristan, The bravest, or perhaps the most foolish of us, suggested checking out the elevator shaft. We followed him through the dark corridors. When we reached the shaft, Tristan peered into the abyss below and thought he saw something moving, but it vanished quickly. I dismissed it as a trick of the light. Bobby, the skeptic, scoffed at the idea of ghosts, while Sarah and I felt uneasy. And as we explored further, we found a makeshift camp with blankets, cans, and a small fire pit. Probably just a homeless person, Tristan suggested. We decided to leave, but as we headed back, Bobby pointed out a shadowy figure darting across the hallway. It moved so fast, it was almost a blur. Just then, Sarah screamed. At the end of the hall stood a tall, thin figure with glowing eyes. It was unnervingly unhuman. Then all of a sudden Tristan shouted, "Run! Just run!" And as soon as he said that, we bolted for the exit. The figure pursued us, its eyes burning into my soul. We sprinted out of the factory, not stopping until we were far from the eerie building. Breathless and terrified, we tried to rationalize what we'd seen, but the sight of those glowing eyes and the feeling of being hunted felt too real. Even now, years later, whenever I hear strange noises or see a fleeting shadow, I remember that night. Some things are better left unexplored, and some mysteries are best left unsolved.